Love in the City of Angels. The warm glow of the California sunset covered Silver Lake in golden light, making the streets shine like they belonged in a dream. The air smelled of fresh coffee and baked bread from a nearby cafe. Elena Vasquez walked quickly, adjusting the strap of her leather bag over her shoulder. Her fingers were stained with charcoal, a reminder of the hours she had spent drawing earlier. Tonight was important. It was her first big showcase at the Haven, a well-known gallery in Los Angeles. If people liked her work, maybe, just maybe, her dream of being a full-time artist could come true. But even as she entered the gallery, her heart pounded with nerves. What if no one cared about her paintings? She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The gallery was small but full of life. Soft jazz music played in the background, and warm yellow lights highlighted the artwork on the white walls. People in elegant clothes stood in small groups, sipping wine and discussing the pieces. Elena's gaze moved across the room, searching for something familiar, someone she could talk to. That's when she noticed him. A man stood alone in front of one of her paintings, studying it closely. He had a sharp jawline, slightly messy brown hair, and a quiet intensity in his blue eyes. He wasn't just looking at the painting, he was seeing it. Her breath caught in her throat. She had painted that piece from memory, using emotions rather than a real subject. The fact that he seemed to understand it made something shift inside her. Curious, she took a step closer. Daniel Carter didn't usually go to art galleries. His best friend, Ethan, had convinced him to come, saying that he needed a break. "You've been locked in your apartment for weeks," Ethan had complained. "Maybe seeing some art will help with your writer's block." Daniel had rolled his eyes but agreed. Now, standing in front of this painting, he had to admit, Ethan might have been right. There was something about this artwork. The woman in the painting wasn't facing the viewer directly. Her face was half hidden in shadows, her expression unreadable. But there was emotion in the way her shoulders were slightly tense, in the way her lips were parted as if she were about to speak. The longer he looked, the more he felt something stir inside him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned his head and found himself face to face with a woman. She had dark brown eyes, warm and curious, and a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, it's powerful." The woman smiled slightly. "I'm glad you think so." Something in her tone made him pause. His eyes flicked to the small nameplate below the painting. Elena Vasquez. "You painted this?" he asked, surprised. She nodded, guilty as charged. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know much about art, but this one made me stop. That doesn't happen often." Elena tilted her head, studying him. "Are you a critic, then?" He laughed. "No, not at all. I'm a screenwriter. I tell stories with words, not pictures." "Ah," she said, nodding. Both art forms try to capture emotions, just in different ways. Daniel's lips curled into a smile. Exactly. The conversation felt easy, natural. He wanted to ask more about her work, about how she created something so full of feeling, but before he could, someone called Elena's name. She sighed. "I should probably go. Art events mean a lot of socializing." Daniel hesitated, then took a step forward. "Would it be strange if I asked to see more of your work sometime?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Do you actually like art, or just this one painting?" He grinned. "I think I like the way you see the world." For a moment, she looked at him like she was deciding something. Then she pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to him. "Come by my studio sometime," she said. "Maybe you'll find another painting that stops you." With that, she turned and walked away. Daniel watched her go, still holding the card between his fingers. Maybe tonight wasn't such a waste after all. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a headache. He wasn't sure if it was from the cheap wine at the gallery or from staying up late, staring at the business card Elena had given him. Elena Vasquez. He had looked her up. She wasn't famous yet, but her work had something that most Hollywood movies lacked: real, raw emotion. By noon, he had made a decision. He needed inspiration for his script, and something told him that Elena could help. So, instead of sitting in front of his laptop, struggling to write, he found himself walking into a quiet cafe in Silver Lake, the address written on the back of her card. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Indie music played softly in the background. And there, sitting by the window, sketchbook in hand, was Elena. She didn't see him at first. Her dark hair fell over one side of her face as she focused on her drawing, pencil moving in slow, thoughtful strokes. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. She looked peaceful, lost in her world. Would she be annoyed if he interrupted? Then, as if sensing his presence, she glanced up. A small, surprised smile crossed her lips. "Daniel Carter." He grinned. "You remembered my name. I'm honored." Elena closed her sketchbook and gestured to the chair across from her. "What brings you here?" He sat down, resting his hands on the table. "I wanted to see more of your work." She raised an eyebrow. "You came to a coffee shop instead of my studio?" Daniel chuckled. "I was hoping for coffee and conversation first. The art can wait." Elena tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she wasn't sure how to solve. Then she shrugged. "All right, writer. Tell me something interesting." He thought for a moment. "Did you know that most Hollywood love stories aren't actually romantic?" She smirked. "And you say that as a screenwriter?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Think about it. Most movies show people falling in love in fast, dramatic ways. But real love? It's in the small things. The way someone looks at you when they think you're not watching. The way their voice softens when they say your name." Elena's fingers tapped lightly on her coffee cup. "That's poetic." "That's honest," he corrected. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavier now, like an unspoken challenge. Then Elena smiled. "All right, Daniel Carter. I'll show you my studio. Let's see if you still like my art after you see the messy side of it." Elena's studio was a small, sunlit space above a bookstore. The walls were covered in half-finished paintings, sketches taped in uneven rows. The air smelled of paint and old books, with a hint of jasmine from a candle burning near the window. Daniel stepped inside, looking around like he was stepping into a secret world. "You weren't lying," he said, eyes scanning the chaos. "It's definitely messy." Elena laughed, setting down her bag. "Art isn't supposed to be neat." He walked toward a large canvas leaning against the wall. A woman's figure, half-painted, her face turned away. "She looks familiar," he murmured. Elena hesitated, then crossed her arms. "It's personal." Daniel didn't push. Instead, he turned to her. "Do you ever paint people you know?" She smirked. "Maybe." He took a step closer. "Would you ever paint me?" Elena looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to imagine him on a canvas. "Only if you can sit still," she teased. Daniel grinned. "I can try." That night, he sat on a wooden stool, watching as Elena's hands moved, her pencil tracing the first lines of his face. And with every quiet moment, every stolen glance, he realized something. This wasn't just about inspiration anymore, he wanted to know her. Days turned into weeks, and their lives slowly became intertwined. Daniel found excuses to visit her studio, claiming he needed inspiration. Elena pretended not to notice that he always brought her coffee, always knew when she needed a break. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop of her building, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Daniel turned to her. Do you ever think about love? He asked. Elena let out a soft breath, hugging her knees to her chest. I used to. What changed? She hesitated. People leave. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. Not everyone. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then, without thinking, she leaned in. Their lips met, soft, slow, hesitant. A question. A promise. And for the first time in a long time, Elena thought, maybe love wasn't so impossible after all. Elena and Daniel's days became a blend of creativity and companionship. They often explored Los Angeles together, seeking inspiration from the city's diverse art scene. One afternoon, Elena suggested, there's a new exhibit at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's all about modern interpretations of classic pieces. Want to check it out? Daniel nodded. Sounds perfect. Maybe it'll spark some ideas for my script. At the museum, they wandered through the halls, discussing the artworks. Elena's insights into the techniques and emotions behind each piece fascinated Daniel. As they stood before a vibrant abstract painting, Daniel remarked, it's like the artist poured all their emotions onto the canvas. Elena smiled, exactly. Art is about expressing what words often can't. Their visits to various galleries and art installations not only fueled their individual creativity but also deepened their connection. Despite their growing bond, both faced personal challenges. Daniel's writer's block persisted. And Elena grappled with self-doubt about her art's direction. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day, Daniel confided, I feel like I'm stuck. No matter what I write, it feels empty. Elena reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. Maybe you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Remember why you started writing in the first place. He sighed, it's hard when the industry demands success. Elena nodded, understanding all too well the pressures of creative professions. Let's take a break this weekend. There's a beautiful hiking trail in Griffith Park. Nature might help clear our minds. The hike provided a much-needed respite. As they reached a vantage point overlooking the city, Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity. Thank you, he whispered, pulling Elena close. To celebrate a small victory, Daniel completing a draft of his script, they decided to have a special night out. Elena suggested, I've heard about this cozy French restaurant called Amour. It's supposed to have a romantic ambiance. At Amour, they enjoyed a delightful meal, the intimate setting enhancing their connection. Soft candlelight flickered between them as they shared stories and dreams. After dinner, they took a stroll along the nearby streets, the cool evening air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. As they paused under a street lamp, Daniel looked into Elena's eyes. I don't think I've ever been this happy. Elena smiled, me neither. Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing the moment. However, the realities of their professions soon intruded. Daniel received feedback from a producer suggesting major changes to his script, while Elena's upcoming gallery show loomed, bringing mounting pressure. One night, tensions boiled over. I don't understand why they can't see the value in my story, Daniel fumed. Elena, equally stressed, snapped, at least you have someone interested in your work. I'm struggling to even get noticed. The argument escalated, both venting their frustrations. Finally, Elena took a deep breath, we're both under a lot of pressure. Maybe we need some space to focus on our work. Daniel nodded reluctantly, maybe you're right. They decided to take a step back, focusing on their individual challenges. The end.